I do thank you for giving me just a couple minutes of your time. I may be the smartest guy with a bow tie, but you, my listener, with the regular tie or the open collar, you can lead your category too. You just have to give me a couple minutes of your time every day, and we will provide a necessary reorientation session to get you on your way to make yourself more useful and more lococentric, more colorful, more open to other people, more caring about strangers, more caring about foreigners, the lost, the poor, and those who are simply confused. There are many people like that. To help us straighten each other out and help give some moral guidance, if you will, to the conversation about Chattanooga is Chris Sorenson. He is an abbot. He is the founder of Mission Chattanooga, which meets at the camp house. There are a couple of maybe 3 different camp house gathering places. We'll hear details from Chris in just a minute. He's the abbot, has been here for 8 years. He and his wife, Angie, a wife of 20 years, have 2 children, sons, 17 and 9. He's 43 years old. Chris, it seems to me that one great problem in Christianity, even though Christians are the salt and they are the salt and savor of culture, they prevent decay. They're a great blessing wherever they are. There still seems to be a kind of laxness in Christendom in America, and that is that Christians view the gospel as having a purely local or should I say a purely private effect. It is affecting the person, the individual's salvation, but little do they think, it seems, that the gospel claims God's jurisdiction over banking, over warfare, over law, over courts, over city councils, over ordinances. Say the ordinance that's before the city council tomorrow, that is a ban on in many parts of the city on short-term vacation rentals. What do you make of this claim? Is there an alternative way of thinking about Christianity in the larger sense of culture and progress?
Sure. I mean, I think that when we think about Christianity in America, it's taken this sort of it's taken its cues from the Enlightenment, which hasn't always been helpful. I mean, we have privatized Christianity, we have privatized Christian faith, and sort of made it a doctrinal faith, a system of beliefs, but that hasn't been the historic Christian faith. I mean, the church has always been the great supporter of the arts. If you go to any village in England, then in the middle of the village you'll find a church, and then the church was the place where you went to do a business deal in the courtyard of the church. It's where the day, once a week, you would have a day where people would come together and have commerce. If there was an invading army, you would flee into the church. If you wanted beautiful works of art done, the church would be the purveyors of those things, and even church architecture was the most beautiful building in the town. So I think that somewhere along the way, we've made Christianity seem like it's just an individual decision that we make. And at the Mission Chattanooga, that isn't our view. We've sort of taken an approach that we are supposed to create culture and reveal Christ through doing so.
Well, can you be specific as to how the members, the Christians who worship with you on the Lord's Day at Mission Chattanooga at the various camp houses, what are they supposed to go out and do? How are they supposed to be in light of culture?
Well, first and foremost, like a very robust theology of vocation. So whatever your vocation is, God is asking you to do it to your utmost, and we should be the most excellent business people around, the most judicious and fair policemen. We should be the most wise councilmen, and so on and so forth. So it's a very robust theology of culture. But then beyond that, we do projects together as a community. We've sort of adopted 2 different schools in the area, and really pour into them. We've helped fund and found an organization. Well, we didn't really found Build Me a World, but one of our clergy members runs Build Me a World, which is an urban mentoring group. And so things like that. We have the camp house, and the camp house is sort of a cultural gathering spot in the city center. We have the meeting house in Red Bank, functioning similarly. We founded 2 schools ourselves, and well, 3, including a seminary. So,
Well, mention something about Urban World, a mentoring program that members of Mission Chattanooga, which is part of the Anglican denomination, what are they about, and why should my listener care?
Yeah, so we have so we support this thing called Build Me a World, and it's actually run again by one of our clergy members. And Build Me a World is an urban mentoring project that's really built around the idea of reframing people's stories, and so helping young people move out of a victim mentality and into this idea that they have a future that's victorious, and for a lot of people, that's a huge step. You know, you can spend your entire life feeling like you're a victim, feeling like things are being done to you, and rightfully so. I mean, rightfully so, right? But at the same time, if we can help young people start to believe that their life is on a positive trajectory, then we can really make lasting change. Some of these folks we're mentoring literally are former and current gang members. So we're as far as I'm aware, we're the only group doing that, actually meeting with gang members.
Well, is your main theory there just the power of positive thinking of Dr. Schuller's Crystal Cathedral, or is it something more substantial?
I think it's around this. You know, I think a lot of times when people have tried to work through how to bring about human flourishing, how to bring about, okay, I believe we have some systemic poverty in Chattanooga. What do we do about that? And then part of the problem is that we have the leaders in some of these communities, some of the smartest brains, some of the most entrepreneurial thinkers, they're actually gang members. They're actually drug dealers, because this is the way they're seeing other people make a living. And so to turn that and sort of go, man, let's look at the success rate here. How many of your friends are incarcerated at this point? How many of your friends have died? Boy, if we could put this thinking towards something else. And that's why we also support something called Co-Starters. Co-Starters is co-founded by one of our clergy members, Will Joseph. Co-Starters is a group that helps entrepreneurs get launched, get started.
Well, the idea of gang members being very smart is very interesting for me to hear you say, because I've made that assertion several times to my listener, that the gang members are highly fluid, they're highly mobile, they're very perceptive of other people's needs and wants, though they are often, I would say probably almost all of them are obsessed with their own pleasures and their own immediate gratifications. They have a very short-term perspective, and they're not thinking about how to help other people, but they're really thinking about how to help themselves. So the gospel, it would seem to me, would help them think, okay, someone else needs help. If you help that person, you're made valuable, you are pleasing to God. But also look at the good you can do, and these are very smart young men. Very their villainies often are where they end, but their impulse and their perception of human nature is often very, very sound.
Yeah, I agree.
Is that kind of what you're saying?
I agree.
I'm restating it.
Yeah,
with
sure.
More words.
Sure. No, I agree wholeheartedly, and I'm thinking of a young man. We have weekly meetings of Build Me a World, and I'm thinking of a young man that I heard just a few weeks ago who, I mean, the topic of discussion at that meeting was, when was the last time you saw somebody die? And this young man said, well, I've seen 3 people die in the last year. And then he went on to say, you know, after my 3rd incarceration, by the time I was 18, I started to realize that this life isn't working. And so now he has this real passion of going towards young people, because now he's in his 20s. He's going towards young people and trying to help them get out of that life and make themselves into more productive citizens.
So the Christian concept that you have to go into that work, Chris Sorenson of Mission Chattanooga, is that God has a calling, God has a law that needs to be honored, and we want people to understand that claim upon them, which in a way is an investment in law. It's an investment in the right rule and self-government. Sure. Again, that's part of the Christian sure. conception of Christ's grace upon the lost. And so together, these ideas with the power of the Holy Spirit bring a person to slowly reorient himself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, when we speak about the law, first of all, we have several policemen that go to our church. we love the police. They come and they've had to come to the camp house fairly regularly. We're on MLK, and it's a developing neighborhood, and the police have always been great. At the same time, I wonder whether some of our policies are the most helpful in helping some of these young people move ahead. So I'm thinking, something a lot of people don't know about me is I have 24 years now of sobriety from drug and alcohol addiction. Thankfully, I had parents with the means to help me get help. And I think about how much money we spend on incarceration when we could be spending that money on helping people sort of get out of that life if they so desire. So I think that isn't something, our policemen are tasked with upholding the laws that we have in place. But I have been excited to look at some of the communities in Massachusetts that have had these sort of voluntary, you can bring in the drugs and you can ask for help and they get you help. And I think that costs our society less in the long run as well. But when I think about a lot of these young people, Jesus is called to the widow and the orphan, and the orphan is the fatherless. That's who the orphan is. And some of our social policy have made these folks, public housing and that whole generational public housing where you can only have a certain amount of income, right? And so that ended up forcing a lot of fathers out of the house. And by doing this, what's happened is we have generations now of fatherless. So we have generations of orphans that Jesus and God is calling us to care for.
Well, Chris Sorenson, what would Christianity offer, if you could somehow express it in a short form, what would Christianity have to say about a reform in this particular area?
I don't know. Maybe just grace. These days, something a lot of your listeners may not know is folks with real means, folks with the internet, for instance, they order their drugs online. And so
they're illegal drugs?
They're illegal drugs.
From the deep web.
Yeah, from the dark web. That's where they order their drugs. So if you're if you're a parent at home and you have a teenager and they're receiving strange boxes, they may be drugs. At the same time, people without that access, they're doing drugs and they're the ones being arrested. And so if there's a way to sort of turn that public policy towards reform, towards redemption, right? Because what we see is when people get into once they're incarcerated, we're not seeing a lot of redemption, are we? We're seeing repeated offenders going back into jail again. They're learning how to be better criminals sometimes by going to prison. So I'm not a public policy maker, but there does seem to be something there. I guess a call to redemption, redeeming people.
This is David Tulis, and we're talking with Chris Sorenson, who is the abbot at Mission Chattanooga, which runs the camp house and the cultural centers. And he has been talking with us about the you might say the public face of Christianity, the public claims that the gospel in the Old and New Testaments makes upon humankind. Let me ask you about your Co-Starters program, Chris Sorenson. What in the gospel, what idea or grace does a person get in the gospel to launch a business? What does he have to have in his makeup and in his view about other people to become an entrepreneur and maybe escape the draw of the gang life?
Sure. I want to be clear that we don't own Co-Starters. Co-Starters is its own entity, but one of our clergy members is the founder. I just want to make that clear. And that's also true with Build Me a World. It's a separate entity, but we helped. One of our clergy members helps start it. But on the entrepreneurialism side, I mean, God repeatedly sort of encourages his people to be about human flourishing. One of the exciting things about the Bible that a lot of people think we're going to die and go to heaven, but actually at the end of time, we're going to be in a city. What's amazing about God is he wants to spend eternity not just with his people, but he wants to spend eternity with his people in the epicenter of all of human cultivation. And so that means and it actually says the wonders of the nation are going to come in through the Jerusalem gate, into this new Jerusalem, and they're going to somehow be sanctified on their way in. So I think, for instance, about today, if the new Jerusalem were to come today, I wonder whether or not we would see iPads. I wonder what the wonders of the nations. The only example we have of what these things are in the Bible are the ships of Tarsus, which were the greatest ships of their era. And so you wonder, so entrepreneurialism not only helps human flourishing, but sort of God's entrepreneurial, it seems.
If you had 6 words or less, Chris Sorenson, to describe the main theme of the Bible, what would they be?
Boy, 6 words or less.
I'll give you 10 words.
Here we go.
10 words or less. What is the main theme of the scriptures?
God believes in you even if you don't believe in him. God loves you and wants an opportunity to see you flourish, to see your community flourish.
Okay, but that's all right. But going back to 10 words, the main words are God wants you to flourish in him, or
in him. In him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, how I offer the transition from wrath to grace, the transition from wrath to grace. And what I like about those words, which are not original to me, is that they have a picture of progress. In other words, there is a gain in humankind. Just think of the shift between the Old Testament and the New. In the Old Testament, all mankind was lost. Every tongue, nation, and tribe was in darkness and condemned to hell, except for one people. Those were the Israelites. And then with the resurrection came suddenly an expansion of that promise to all mankind, every tongue, tribe, nation, every continent. All men could have, over time, the work of the gospel working individually and in their cultures, in their nations. And so there's a massive expansion of the grace principle across the human race with the resurrection. They're suddenly expanded from Israel. The Israelites were no longer with us, but that narrow nation to every nation. In making vast the promise of God of grace, of forgiveness for sin. And so that's a tremendously progressive, tremendously optimistic transaction there at the cross, right?
Well, yes,
and tomb, right?
It's absolutely true, and it's true historically at this point. I mean, the majority of the Christian world is in the global South. I mean, the majority of Christians at this point. Say more. The majority of the Christian world. I mean, the most vibrant Christian churches are now in Africa and in India and in Asia. They're not in North America. They're not in Western Europe. These are places, you think about Rwanda. So Rwanda, which is sort of our founding church, we're an Anglican church. We were planted by the church in Rwanda. And
wait, back up. We here in Chattanooga were planted by the church in Rwanda.
Because
what happened in Rwanda, and what is Rwanda?
Yeah. So Rwanda is, a country in Africa. They went through the Great Genocide. A really hard movie to watch is Hotel Rwanda, but it tells the story of the genocide, massive genocide along tribal lines. Of course, for whatever reason, America didn't intervene and help people, but millions of people were killed in a matter of weeks. Out of that tragedy, the church flourished. The church came in and provided stability and love and a reculturing of Rwanda. Well, Rwanda began looking at North America and said, boy, they're in trouble. We need to send missionaries to North America.
Why is North America in trouble?
Well, I mean, they would say North America is in trouble because we've lost this sort of cultural view of the gospel, that it's not just an individual decision that you make and you sit at home and think about who God is. It's a culture transforming a faith. And in Africa, this is very real because what they see in the Muslim church is a very clear strategy. What they see in Islam is a very clear strategy. I mean, if you become a Muslim, you get a job. It's that simple. And that's why Islam is thriving in so much of the world. It's very practical. And somehow Christianity in America has become very individual, and we've lost our saltiness because of it.
You're saying that Christianity is somehow otherworldly. It thinks about your heaven. There's a lot of interest in the next life.
Sure.
And there's not really a lot of discussion or interest in people like me. I'm a Christian, a deacon, and I talk about things that come before me as a journalist and a writer. And these things don't interest Christian people. They don't care about the things that we often discuss here at Nooga Radio and at Nooganomics.com. Somehow they're not touched by these things. God does not really care about those things. Those are part of the world that is going up in flames, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah, that's off. If we, I was listening to you on the way in. By the way, this Christian Thorensen, must be the Danish radio hour because you have two Scandinavian names there. But I think that when I was listening to you on the way in, this Airbnb thing struck me in a couple ways. I mean, the Bible speaks directly about private property, right? So in Deuteronomy, you should not move your neighbor's boundary mark. So there is this idea of private property. But the thing that struck me even more is Thank goodness there was Airbnb in Bethlehem, because Jesus had to have a place to stay.
This is David Tulis. We're talking with Chris Sorenson, who is the abbot at Mission Chattanooga that runs the camp house, a fellowship that began in Africa as Africans suffering multi-million person genocide realized that North Americans, that white people and blacks occupying living in this country had a very weak system, and they were lacking in faith. They were weak in their faith, so they sent missionaries over here, and guess what started in Chattanooga? Mission Chattanooga. David Tulis, I've got some important messages. Hang on.
In-depth traffic, news, and information. Mornings on Nooga Radio, AM 1240 and 92.7 FM. The Tennessee Valley